Hey everyone, as always, hope everyone's doing well and staying safe these days. So I have another motherboard review here for you. This one's from Intel, their latest chipset release here, the Z790. Made for 12th generation Intel CPUs, of course, but also the newest 13th generation as well too. There's been a lot of chit chat about whether this generation or the top high tier class of this CPU, the 13th generation, matches, beats, or even fails to beat the latest release from Ryzen as well too, which I've definitely go ahead and checked out some motherboards from them as well too in their latest chipsets. So over here we actually have one from MSI, the MAG Z790 Tomahawk Wi-Fi motherboard. Very similar to their previous chipset, they have two variants, a DDR4 and DDR5, depending which memory chips you decide to use on that. So right now we have the DDR4, both pretty much almost identical. I'm sure their BIOS are very similar as well too. Just the little difference there too. As a matter of fact, if you actually do get the DDR5 variant, I believe you won't even see this in the naming scheme right there. So whatever, just something to keep in mind. Motherboard actually does have some weight to it. And let's go ahead and get it unboxed, installed. Do a quick overview of the physical of the motherboard itself, and as always, a quick overview of the BIOS as well too. And let's go ahead and toss into a case and see how it works. Let's hit it. So as always, before any motherboard unboxings, go ahead and take a look at the box itself here. Actually see the full title here. Again, remind you that this is the DDR4 version, not the DDR5 version of this particular motherboard. Let's go ahead and flip this over, look at some details on the back. Actually see all the features here that this actually does offer. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, audio boost. Obviously, one thing becoming much more standard with motherboards these days, 2.5G LAN. Definitely something that a lot of motherboards I've done reviews on the last year and a half or so have just come with. And you can actually see a good visual of the motherboard here with our little details here on the bottom. Obviously your CPU socket, chipset, 12th and 13th generation Intel CPUs here. And down our DIMM slots, your USB ports and everything, audio and other little details right there. Very important, and I'm really glad that motherboard manufacturers have been doing this for some years now. If you're actually really curious to see what the port area and the I/O panel actually looks like, you can actually see all those right here in the little Wi-Fi antennas. Let's go ahead and get this unboxed and take a look. I have actually had a couple of questions about MSI motherboards. And I just want to go ahead and just toss this information out there just in case anyone's wondering. I have noticed that the majority, if not all, MSI motherboards I've actually done reviews on do not actually come with a seal or anything like that. They actually just come like this. Literally, I just opened it. Brand new from the retailer. And that's actually normal. I don't believe any retailer throws in their own labels, but you never know. That's always a possibility. I believe Micro Center has actually done that on some of their motherboards. So here we go. There's the motherboard right over here. Let's see what there is. Oh, I will tell you over the years, less and less little stuff that comes with the motherboard included here, which I guess could be a good thing. Looking over here, looks like we have some cable tie labels. So like your SATA cables and whatnot. You want to go ahead and label them, write something down there. Small little quick installation guide. European Union notice. This is something I actually never really looked at. Here are your Wi-Fi antennas. They will connect right in the back. And just drop something. Here are two SATA cables. And it looks like what I actually dropped is just basically another one of the little M2 screws and riser screws right over here. That's pretty much it. Oh, forgot one little thing. It also comes with a little USB thumb drive, and I believe this actually comes with drivers, possibly a BIOS firmware, and feel free to use it for anything you actually want. That's pretty much it. You're probably wondering where the manual is, and that's actually included on this, probably in the PDF, or you can go ahead and just download it from MSI's website directly. kind of hear that little like plastic sound. It looks like it's something on the bottom or on the side. It's a slightly unattractive sound, to be honest, but let's go ahead and take a look. Maybe something's a little loose. I always like to save these bags, so I try not to rip these bags open and just make a big mockery mess out of them. And there we are. So I believe I actually found out what was causing those weird plastic sound noises, and it's basically these heat sinks over here that have to do with the covering the M2 slots. And it looks like all of them are actually doing this. So I'm not sure if these are actually tight, because if you try to move it from the opposite side, I actually don't hear anything. So just keep that in mind. If you actually do hear that noise, it's probably just this not fully tightened down. And feel free just to screw it down just a little bit more, just so it doesn't make that little shaky sound. So as always with this motherboard review here, let's go ahead and take a look at all the features, a little bit of a visual of it. Take a look at the socket, all the connections we have, try to get an idea of what you're looking at here when you unbox this motherboard, and wonder what on earth all these connections are. So looking at the I/O panel over here, basically the rear of your computer, once you actually have this installed and up and running, we do have a DisplayPort and an HDMI connection over here on the left. And this is actually if you're using an Intel CPU that actually has onboard graphics, built-in graphics on it. These will be your connections here. Bear in mind, as I always mention, even if you decide to use a CPU with built-in graphics but decide to use a dedicated GPU in the future, then you can still use the GPU, and the video card will actually be your main connection for displays, so DisplayPort and all that other stuff, or even USB-C, Thunderbolt. I know a lot of modders are now offering that particular connection, particularly in the business world. Over here, looks like we have about 8 USB ports plus 2 USB-C. We have 2 here, 4 here, another 2 over there, and 2 USB-C connections. Very impressive to actually see additional USB-C connections now, with that becoming more prevalent and the devices supporting this, particularly even mobile phones. So definitely great to see that here. No PS2 ports, just an FYI, in case everyone's wondering. Over here we actually do have little switches here for BIOS firmware, clearing the BIOS or flashing the BIOS. So if you actually do decide to go ahead and flash your BIOS using a USB thumb drive with no CPU memory installed, I believe you actually hit this button here, and your USB thumb drive will be connected to this particular port right over here. Definitely go ahead and look at the instructions. This is actually a procedure I've actually done myself, so definitely look at the instructions to go ahead and see the proper way to flash your motherboard's BIOS. And moving along from the USB ports, we do have our 2.5G LAN connection right over here. Very useful. And as I said before, 2.5G is becoming basically a standard these days. There's obviously higher numbers available and higher tier motherboards or dedicated LAN cards, hitting up to 10G and beyond as well too. And speaking of networking, we do have our Wi-Fi connections right over here. I believe this is probably Wi-Fi 6. And this also offers Bluetooth as well too. So if you're not planning to use Wi-Fi on this motherboard, but do plan to have the option to use Bluetooth later on, go ahead and connect your antennas here, and then just go into the BIOS and disable the Wi-Fi module, and you'll still be able to use Bluetooth. Personally, on desktops, I don't really use Wi-Fi for the most part, with the exception of a desktop in my living room that I actually have dedicated for guests. And to the right, we actually do have our basic audio connections, all of them. The red one signifying the left and right 2-channel stereo channel right over here. Down here we do have a little optical, and all the other connections available for microphone and also for surround sound speakers. One thing I don't mention too much in motherboard review videos, and actually I completely overlook it for the most part, but it's just basically always there and people don't notice it for the most part either. Basically the little CMOS battery right over here, still using the traditional size, and this actually goes back even to the late 90s. I've actually collected a couple of these little batteries over the years from motherboards that have been basically decommissioned, even tossed out, even at a former job when they were tossing them out, and basically the computer's going to be destroyed. I said, why not just grab 1 or 2 batteries just to hang on to? And it's actually not a bad idea, because yes, after a number of years, these do die. Very cheap to replace, but Could also just be a real pain when your motherboard boots up and it's telling you that the CMOS battery is dead. I do know certain brand manufacturers like Dell and Lenovo give you that warning every single time. Alright, now looking at the bottom of the motherboard right over here, we do have a bunch of connections all across the board, all the way from left to right. And right over here, starting immediately, we do see the standard front panel audio connection. If you are actually using or want to actually use those little connections in the front, such as a headphone jack or microphone, I believe usually is the standard they actually have on some cases these days, if they even have them at all. This will actually be your connection right over here, and you can definitely sneak that little connection under the motherboard, behind the chassis and whatnot, just so you basically a little bit of cable management right over there. Over here, looks like we do have a connection here for RGB LED connection. This is actually a 4-pin, and right to the right of it, we actually do have a 3-pin as well too. So I believe this motherboard's actually going to have a few of these, and hopefully I'll be able to catch all of them, because usually one or two escapes me, and yeah, that's unfortunate. A little bit further to the right is a connection that I wish more motherboards would actually have these days, particularly some Ryzen, the latest Ryzen boards that I've actually reviewed. This is actually your Thunderbolt connection right over here. Very useful if you do have a Thunderbolt USB 3 or 4, whatever they want to call it, on the front panel. This will be the connection right over here. I believe there's actually some other little connections on top of it, and there's also this one right over here, and I believe these are actually related to basically chassis fan connections, I believe. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but I know some of them, if not one of them, is definitely related to that. Not many people really use those connections on custom motherboards and custom builds, but it's actually there in case you're interested. Further to the right, we actually have 3 system fan connections here, all 4-pin, but you can also use 3-pin fan connections as well too. All of them available here to use, and you can definitely control the voltage, the RPM and whatnot, or the temperature thresholds in the BIOS, so definitely look out for that. I'll be reviewing the BIOS right after the entire build is complete. Over here we do have 2 old-fashioned USB 2.0 connections here, basically for front panel use. And of course some devices on the motherboard, such as a power supply, may actually have its own little connection that you can put in here just to go ahead and monitor voltages and other stuff like that. Some other devices might actually have that option as well too. So these actually may not be so useless as some people think. Further to the right, we actually do have another system fan connection. This one's actually labeled number 5 right over here. And again, another 4-pin, adaptable to 3-pin as well too. Right to the right of it, we actually have one SATA port connection over here, which actually, with the 6 I actually see a little further up. It's a total of 7. So this particular motherboard actually has more SATA ports. Very interesting. And right over here, it looks like we do have the connection, the front panel connections, basically all the power switch, reset, all those other little connections that people love to actually use. Doing so many motherboard reviews, I've actually memorized pretty much where everything is. And I'm actually starting to notice a bit of a standard coming there. So maybe just one step in the right direction, but hopefully there'll be one particular connection that can just be completely standard just to plug in and get everything rolling pretty quick. Related to that, actually up here, I believe is a 4-pin speaker connection, which no one really uses much anymore. Anyway, but right there in case you need it. I just mentioned it a moment ago, but here are our additional 6 SATA connections right over here. All of them basically facing the side, none of them facing up. So maybe this one little connection up here is just for convenience facing up, in case you do have one particular device, such as a mechanical hard drive, that you want to go ahead and plug in there. Actually, in many of my builds, I actually have at least one mechanical hard drive for the purpose of just having high capacity storage, such as 12 or maybe even one day 20 terabytes plugged in, while an SSD just takes care of the operating system and everything else. Moving up the motherboard over here, we actually have a front panel USB-C connection. I was really hoping this motherboard would probably have 2 of these, but one seems to be enough considering how many USB-C ports on the back of the motherboard itself. But if you do have a USB-C port on your computer case in the front, this will be your go-to connection right over here. Speaking of USB 3 or C, we do have a front panel USB 3 connection in this little port right over here. Some of these motherboards actually have 2 of these, and I actually only noticed this one actually has 1. Again, not a big deal considering how many ports it actually has in the rear, including USB-C ports. Moving further up the motherboard, just being shadowed by the DIMM slots in the back, which I'll get to in a moment, is a 24-pin power connection for the motherboard. And this is actually a very standard connection. Previously used to be 20 pins up until the early 2000s or so. Changed it to 24 pin, has not ever changed since. Now we have actually had additional connections for CPU power. Something to keep in mind, originally 4 pin, then 8 pin, and now multiple 8 pins and moving along. So who knows where the next standard will actually take us to. And right over here, you can actually see just hiding in the back is our DIMM slots. 4 DIMM slots here for DDR4 memory. Moving further along the motherboard, we actually have an additional system fan connection, again 4 pin, adaptable to 3. And up here, it looks like we do have a pair of RGB related connections, both of them 3 pin in this case. Additionally, some more 4 pin fan connections, but these appear to be dedicated for CPU use and also for users who are actually using water cooling, pump use as well too. So be sure to connect them to the appropriate connections here, otherwise your motherboard will flip out thinking that it's operating without a CPU fan and start to rev up those fans up to max speed, which can be quite annoying. So just something to keep in mind there. Just above the CPU socket, we actually have this small, massive looking, I basically just canceled myself right there, this massive looking heatsink right over here, pretty big. Almost actually makes a direct connection with the heatsink back here that's actually covering, being covered by the this little panel here connected to the I/O shield in the back. So it's something to actually keep a look. I'm trying to take a little peek under here, but you actually can see a little bit of a hollow area. Just a little bit of FYI information. And just being shadowed by all this stuff over here are our dual 8-pin CPU connections right over here. Normally you only need one if you're not planning to do any overclocking or do not have a CPU that's crazy over 200 watts of power or whatnot. You probably need to use one 8-pin connection. There's an additional one here in case it needs new CPUs with bigger power requirements, or if you're planning to actually overclock. So in case anyone's wondering, do you have to connect both? The answer is no. In between almost everything is actually the CPU socket right over here. This is actually the 1700 Intel for generation 12 and now 13 socket right over here. Very interesting. Obviously just another Intel socket that's pinless. So all the pins are actually on the motherboard as opposed to the CPU itself. I'll go ahead and remove that during the installation process. It's basically a little plastic covering, just protecting all the pins when the motherboard's actually not in use, which is a good idea. Don't throw these away. Definitely, if you ever decide to put this away or even upgrade and sell it, you'll be expected to actually have this right over here. I'm pretty sure somebody on eBay probably wouldn't really appreciate this actually missing, so to speak. Looking below here, as I mentioned earlier, when I was wondering about the rattling, are basically these little heat sinks that are covering the M2 slots, and I'll go ahead and give you a view of those during the installation process as well too. Seems like we have one here, and possibly 2 over here, and 1 on the bottom down here, just hiding in this whole area. That little gray slot over here, the silver lining and whatnot, is actually your PCI Express slot. So that's going to be where your video card will actually be installed in this case. Down here, it looks like we have an X1 slot and an additional, probably an 8X PCI Express slot right down here as well. That's basically a quick overview of the motherboard itself. Let's go ahead and start the build process. It looks pretty solid, so I'm really looking forward to it. And you'll be a part of that as well too. And then we'll jump in and do a quick overview of the BIOS itself, possibly even try to update the firmware as well if there's one available. So let's get to it. So our system is up and running and fully booted up over here. Just one little note from earlier. I usually actually like to record from any motherboard review I actually do. Basically the initial boot up, because obviously that usually takes the longest, and give you a nice view of the board so you can see the little LED indicators and everything turn on. This time actually, when I turned it on, it seemed like it actually posted pretty quickly. That's not entirely accurate, just because that was actually the second time. The first time I realized, of course, as a goof, I wasn't filming it when I initially turned it on. But I will tell you, just on average, it took about just a little under 30 seconds for the system to actually initially post and give you that message that, of course, CPU memory size have changed. Press F1 or delete to enter setup, blah, blah, blah. So just wanted to let you guys know, just in case everyone thought, whoa, initial post time was like not even 10-15 seconds, which is amazing. That definitely would be amazing, but it actually took a little bit, just a little under 30. Not a big deal, still under a minute. We're up and running. If you enjoyed this video so far, the build process, the overview and everything, and definitely will look forward to see more, because you definitely will be, go ahead and shoot that like. Hit that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well too. Definitely look forward to some more reviews and support the channel. I'll definitely be posting more as well. So here we are looking at the main BIOS screen over here. As with my MSI's BIOS, we usually do have the advanced and easy mode. So right now we're actually in basically the easy mode right over here. That just gives you all the details you need to do and some basic options for changes and whatnot on your motherboard. No real overclocking options here for the most part. Just go do a quick overview of the entire BIOS over here in the easy and of course advanced mode as well too. You can actually see here on the upper right side, basically just taking up more than half the screen. You can see all the details here of your motherboard, current CPU installed, which is a 12100F. I believe this is a 4-core 8-thread CPU right over here. 16 gigs of RAM, your BIOS version, and your BIOS date, which is from late last year in the fall, about September, October. And some other details here, current CPU temperature at 41 degrees Celsius, which is pretty nice. Motherboard even less. Voltage, and some other little details here as well too. Just below here, you do have a boot priority. You can actually go ahead and drag and drop these options around if you want to go ahead and select a particular device to be your priority in boot order. Just to the left over here, you actually have the full date and time, the current CPU temperature, and the DDR current speed of the memory. We are using DDR4 memory, and it's running at 2666 megahertz, and that actually seems correct. You can actually do have the option to change that manually later on if you need to do so, or if you feel it's actually running at the wrong speed. The particular memory chips I installed on this board for testing purposes only. They actually do not have any built-in XMP profiles. If they did, you would actually see these lit up, allowing you the option to go ahead and click or activate any one of them. If there are multiple ones, you'll see the option to click on one or the other to go ahead and activate the ideal settings for the memory chips you have installed. Just over here, you actually do see some further details of the CPU, your multiplier, CPU ratio, and other details here as well too, such as hyperthreading enabled or disabled, and virtualization, which is enabled by default. Moving along here on the left side, we can actually go ahead and click on a couple options here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on memory, where we can actually see full details of the memory chips that are currently installed, particular DIMM slots they're using, basically the ideal slots for dual channel, the total memory. And of course, there's XMP profiles here, which we actually do not have present on these memory modules in this case. Big numbers are here, your current DRAM frequency speed. Continuing on, we actually have a little storage button here, which will actually give you the full details of all devices that are currently connected, whether SATA or basically using the M2 slots. You actually see that over here as well. Now, please note that it's actually, for some reason, identifying my Samsung SSD A50 Pro SSD as an A85. I guess it's just a small little glitch, who knows what. But the hard drive actually does show there, and no problem there whatsoever. Moving along, we actually do have another little option here for fan info, where you can actually see some fan speeds and temperature speeds in a big little chart here and thresholds. This is actually much more easily controllable in Hardware Monitor, and I'll definitely get to that in just a moment. And just below that, last but not least, we actually have a little help button here, which actually can give you some hotkey information. If you want to immediately just go ahead and jump into a particular section here, just hit that corresponding hotkey and it'll immediately take you to that particular area in the BIOS. Further down here, we have the little M flash button, which is actually used to go ahead and flash a newer version of the BIOS firmware. So just go ahead and click on this, and it'll actually take you to ask you to go ahead and switch to this mode. The computer will basically reboot and take you into the flash mode here, where you can actually go ahead and flash the BIOS from a USB thumb drive. Underneath that, we actually have a favorites button where you can go ahead and set up some hotkeys, customized hotkeys for yourself, and immediately jump into a particular section of the motherboard and BIOS that you like to go ahead and take a look at. Under here, one of my favorite sections in any MSI motherboard is basically the hardware monitor, where you can actually go ahead and mess around with temperature and customize temperature and CPU fan threshold. So if you actually go ahead and drag some of these up, you'll see that the corresponding fan, in this case, let's go ahead and use system fan 2 as an example. Go ahead and bring this up a little bit, and you'll see the RPM on this particular fan starting to increase to correspond with the increase here. The CPU is actually usually controlled by a smart fan module over here, and you can go ahead and change those thresholds here just by moving up these up and down in the chart itself. On the bottom of the screen here, we actually have a couple of little switches that you can actually go ahead and toggle these particular devices on or off, such as FTPMM, the sound card, basically the built-in audio card over here, and even actually go ahead and turn on the little LED control as well too. Just a couple of little options here if you actually go ahead and enable or disable them. That is pretty much it here for easy mode, the most basic options you actually need to get your system up and running, and some other details as well too. Go ahead and click on F7 or just click on top of here to immediately jump into advanced mode, where you actually see some more vast and thorough options here. I have to go ahead and try to go over them as much as I can. The top portion of the screen here actually remains the same, your boot priority, all the options here and details here as well too, CPU and DDR RAM, obviously XMP profiles if you actually have them, CPU boost as well too. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these buttons over here. Let's go ahead and click on settings. You immediately see some options here. Clicking on system status, you'll be able to manipulate the date and time and see other details here as well too. All the connections to SATA ports and of course your M2 slots as well here. Some other information just below, including the current BIOS build date. Under advanced, we have some other options here as well too. You do have the option to go ahead and enable or disable built-in audio devices or other devices here as well too. Other settings over here we do have is basically Thunderbolt. You can actually enable and disable those as well here as well. Secure erase options as well too, which immediately will give you over to that particular screen. And some other options here as well too, USB configuration and power management, other options. Something very important here, BIOS CSM or UEFI mode, if you want to go ahead and toggle those two as well too. Clicking on boot, you actually do have the option to manipulate a little bit more in detail the boot options and the boot order as well too down here. Up here you have some other options as well too. So just be sure you know what you're doing here before you go ahead and change some of these options. Under security, we do have some other options here available, including, and very important, especially for Windows 11 users, is trusted computing related to TPM. And last on the list here, we have the save and exit button, where you can actually go ahead and save all the changes or even abandon them or start from scratch basically and have the system reboot shortly right after. Moving along with the buttons here, we actually have the overclocking OC button right over here, where you can actually go ahead and manipulate many overclocking options and customize options for your CPU and memory and other details here. Again, as I mentioned before, if you're not planning to overclock, really you're not going to really be using too many options here. One little option here that I definitely do like to change every now and then is basically a DRAM frequency. You can actually click here and go ahead and select the correct DRAM frequency if it's actually not the correct number over here. Other than that, just be very careful changing everything. Changing the wrong number in overclocking can actually damage your system and maybe even render the system unbootable in this case. You can actually see some really deep options here, such as voltage manipulation and other options here as well too. Below we have the same M flash button we saw earlier. That's actually the same option that will immediately take you to the flash program to update the BIOS firmware. Over here we have OC profile. We can actually go ahead and save particular profiles here if you actually have made changes in the OC section. Memory or CPU related, some combination of the two. You can actually go ahead and save those profiles here if you'd like to, particularly for testing, or even use it for particular scenarios as well too. You even do have the option to save those to USB thumb drive, or even save them for later and actually load them from a USB thumb drive as well too. We have the same hardware monitor button here. We can actually go ahead and manipulate the same temperature and fan RPM thresholds here as well too. And this button always really surprises me. It has different options every time I jump in. Basically, Beta Runner has a couple of little options here that seem to change. One little option I've seen mostly is NVMe self-test. Very interesting option here, and some other options here as well too. Definitely go ahead and check out the latest manual online if you actually want to get some more information on these options here. That is basically it for a quick overview of the particular BIOS here. And if you have any questions regarding this, by all means shoot me a question, leave a comment, and I'll definitely answer as best as I possibly can. I usually tend to use memory chips with some LED function on that. Not using them this time. The motherboard looks really dark and hardly any light, just a little indicator coming from the video card itself. No indicators up here either since the board is already booted up. So looks a little bit bland, unfortunately, but so that basically just says this motherboard doesn't really have any LED or RGBs anywhere on the top, side, bottom, or even the little area back here where the backplate is. So just something to keep in mind if you actually are looking forward to some sort of option built onto the motherboard itself. You're not going to find that on this particular board itself, but bear in mind it does have a number of multiple RGB connections, 3-pin and 4-pin. You can actually go ahead and use and make a lot of things colorful inside your system if you really want to basically give it that snazzy look right over there. And I know a lot of people really like to do that these days. So even if it's not missing, it's missing all these colorful options on the board itself, you do have other options as well too. Obviously, one little thing I like to do is the memory chips, and also even having some light coming from the heatsink itself, if possible. Some people definitely like to put them on the fans too. Heck, some people even like to have them on the video card as well too. Hope everyone enjoyed the quick overview of the BIOS, the board itself, and of course the system build itself here as well too. Definitely shoot a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and drop any comments you might have, any questions as well too. I'll be more than happy to answer them as best as I possibly can. Looking forward to hearing any feedback you might have, and of course look forward to more videos as well too. Just go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well. Thanks again for watching everyone, and as always, stay safe, take care, enjoy your day.